Hello, everyone, and welcome to Musing, music for the adventurous listener here on CJSW 90.9 FM in Calgary and on all your favorite podcast platforms. I'm your host, Janna Sailor. Thanks for joining me for this hour of celebrating the voices, stories, and creative work of Canadian composers and artists. As part of our Pride Month programming, this week we are honored to feature acclaimed Canadian composer Rodney Sharman. Known for his distinctive and imaginative compositional voice, Rodney's work has been performed internationally by leading ensembles and artists, earning him recognition as one of Canada's most important contemporary composers. Beyond his remarkable artistic achievements, Rodney has also been a vital advocate and champion for queer composers and LGBTQ+ representation within contemporary classical music. Through both his music and mentorship, he has helped create greater visibility, inclusion, and space for queer artists within a field that has not always welcomed diverse identities openly. In this conversation, we explore Rodney's compositional journey, creative process, reflections on identity and community, and the evolving landscape of Canadian music. Let's listen in.
Ja, maar niet zoveel.
But it grows dark, very dark.
The room is growing crepuscular.
Darkness will soon be here.
Rodney Sharman, thank you so much for joining me here on Musing. Such a pleasure to have you in a conversation.
The pleasure's mine.
Let's dive right in to your creative work and your extensive body of composition. How do you describe yourself and your compositional voice?
I think the best description was given to me by a student once who called me a sound freak. And it really is true about my approach to music and to life. I delight in unusual sounds and in the sensuality and textures and qualities of sound, and particularly tone, color, timbre. A lot of ideas for my instrumental music come from the acoustical properties of the instruments themselves, from the harmonic series. If I'm writing for guitar, for example, I will alternate strings so that the strings of the guitar are constantly ringing as though I were writing for 6 gongs. If I'm writing for flute, durations of things might have to do with how long a breath can be held, or of certain extended techniques on various instruments that can provide an extension of the ordinary tone color. With vocal music, it's a little bit different because I'm somebody who really values words And my vocal music, by comparison, tends to be more conservative in that I believe in text delivery and trying to make the words comprehensible, which often means that the text comes first, in a sense, in terms of blending of the art forms.
Can you take me through your evolution as a composer and how you came to discover your compositional voice, and whether that was through a more traditional education or significant life experiences and influences?
I was born in a small town in Saskatchewan in Bigger, and I did have piano lessons as a boy. My mother had a piano and an electric organ in the basement. We were middle class and had a big house, so there was space downstairs for all of these instruments and so on. She had a beautiful alto voice and was a lover of the pop music of, the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and into the 70s. And we made house music. So I know a lot of evergreens and Tin Pan Alley and Broadway songs. These were the tunes that I grew up with. I was not a gifted pianist, but I learned recorder in school like so many other children, and I liked it. And when I entered concert band in grade 7, my parents chose my instrument, I think in part because it was cheap. So I played the clarinet, and when I was 10, I begged them for a violin, and they didn't want to have the sound of a beginner violin in the house. Otherwise, I'd be playing the violin. They gave me, for my 10th birthday, gave me a plastic violin with nylon strings, and I was absolutely heartbroken. But while all of this is going on, I am recording music downstairs with my parents' old cassette machine, one of the first from 1968, a Bell and Howell cassette player, and I was putting books on the keys of the electric organ and taking the wooden part off the bottom of this big upright grand piano and playing on the strings inside, putting pedals down and so on. So I was always somehow composing. I also wrote music down, but because even in Saskatoon, there wasn't manuscript paper really. I was drawing my own manuscript paper and mimeographing it, and I was writing my first pieces in a sort of primitive way at first. I didn't know what a score looked like, so I wrote a trio for 3 clarinets, and the first part had more notes in it than the second. They ended at different places. I was writing them out more like a medieval monk than a modern person. And then a year before we moved to Victoria in 1973, I started playing the flute because the only flute player in Bigger graduated from high school, and I wanted to play something that nobody else played, and discovered when we moved to Victoria, especially because this was the time of a then famous pop flute player named Paul Horn, who used to play to whales, and there were all of these meditative recordings and so on. It was the time of transcendental meditation and so on. Flute was unbelievably popular, and I discovered to my surprise that I was one of the best, even though I'd never had a lesson. I played in the Saskatchewan Summer School of the Arts Orchestra, playing both clarinet, bass clarinet, flute, and piccolo. But I was lucky in the sense that Bigger had an extremely good band director for all 3 years that I was there. They were different people, but they were all generous, extremely musical and enthusiastic people. Part of it really, I benefited tremendously from excellent junior high band directors. The first, Ronald McCormick, was from Ireland, who really changed my life through his enthusiasm, charisma, and encouragement. And then we moved to Victoria, and I was able to study flute with the principal of the Victoria Symphony, Jan Menting, who was a wonderful musician, and started studying composition with Murray at Askin. And my parents objected to this very much and stopped paying for my lessons. So I went to the director of the school and told them that although we were middle class, that I would like to have a bursary, that I needed one, and I got a job as a busboy. And because I had facial hair very young, I was waiting on tables and bartending by the time I was 16, and put myself through school. That way, paid for all of my composition lessons. And my father actually offered me money when I went to university for my bachelor's, and I refused it. And I know I hurt him very much doing that. And we later reconciled and became very close, but it was not an easy time with either him or with my mother.
Can you talk a little bit more about some of those obstacles that have shaped your career path or particular turning points that were particularly impactful in shaping your career trajectory?
I would rather talk about the good fortune than the bad fortune. After I did my bachelor's degree at the University of Victoria and studied with Rudolf Komaros, I think he's still composing at age 95 and is an incredible musician of unbelievable originality. So I had very good fortune there and was singing in the chamber choir, was doing like all of the performance opportunities that I had and playing in orchestra. It really made me into a very well-rounded musician. I went from there to study in Freiburg in Germany. I was supposed to study with Witold Ludosławski at the École supérieure de la musique de Warsaw. I was going to go to the Warsaw Conservatory, and martial law was declared in 1980. And so I had to find a place to study fast, and I knew I wanted to study in Europe. Rudolf had heard of Brian Ferneyhough and that he was an interesting composer. He'd heard this actually from Owen Underhill, who went to Darmstadt. And so I went to Freiburg without speaking German, except for the few texts I knew from singing Beethoven's Ninth and a few Bach cantatas. I went to Freiburg, was lucky enough, again, because Germany was very different then, to learn German while I was there. I did all my graduation and exams in German. We were given a choice of languages, but I wanted to be fluent and eventually even was an interpreter in Darmstadt and so on when the interpreter didn't show up. So I had fantastic education in Europe. Worked in the Netherlands as a guest artist at the Institute of Sonology when I was doing electronic music, and then got headhunted by Morton Feldman, and I was offered the opportunity to do a doctorate at the State University of New York at Buffalo. I never thought I would do a doctorate ever, but Morton and I had gotten along when we met in Darmstadt, and I loved his music, and so I kept a room in Toronto and lived in Buffalo and did my doctorate there. I was very fortunate in studying with some brilliant musicians and working with very good people.
It's so fascinating to me how these worlds have merged, like this very structured, traditional educational model with some of these pillars of the compositional world have now merged with these life experiences as artistic output so often does. Can you talk to me about bringing those worlds together?
I still play recorder, occasionally play recorder professionally. I usually play 17th century French music. I'm usually hired to play in Baroque orchestras, but I still perform from time to time. I played a benefit concert for the East Vancouver Community Music School. No, absolutely. My love of Baroque music, my love particularly of the continuo sound from recordings by Nicholas Harnoncourt of the Monteverdi operas that included harp and theorbo and harpsichord together. So there are these three individual plucking sounds together. That became the basis, really, for me when I was asked to write a piece for the new ensemble in Amsterdam when it was just beginning. And at that time, the ensemble was clarinet, mandolin, guitar, violin, double bass, and percussion. And with the kind of arrogance that comes with youth, when I was asked, rather than being grateful, I said, I won't do it unless you have a harp in the ensemble because it needs the sustain of a bigger instrument with all this plucking, and I want Baroque flute. And they said yes. And so the piece that really gave me my first international success, Erstarrung, which was performed in Darmstadt and then all over the world, in Australia and in Albuquerque, New Mexico, all these places that you wouldn't expect it. And this is all pre-internet because people heard the work in Darmstadt, loved it, and took it around, played it wherever they were. It was a piece that really established me as a kind of international figure. And eventually in Darmstadt, I won the Kranichsteiner Prize, which is considered one of the most important awards for composers. It certainly is a life-changing award. And I believe I'm still the only Canadian who has won that prize.
Tell me more about some of your most significant collaborations with artists and really developing those relationships with artists, either as individuals or ensembles, and the impact that has had on your composition and your creative direction.
Particularly as I grow older, I get ideas from colleagues. And I work a lot with a pianist in Vancouver, Kiyo Iwaasa, who often approaches me with an idea, specifically saying, I would like you to do this. And I ruminate and I find some way in. She performed a piece of mine called The Garden, which is about the politics of men kissing men. It's done with a text by Peter Elliott Weiss, a playwright who lives in Toronto, who wrote Sex Tips for Modern Girls. It's a kind of music theater piece, which I wrote for Anthony DeMar, who really specializes in these things, a New York pianist. And Rachel was the first woman to perform it. And she's one of these artists who never stops learning, the kind of artist I think that we all aspire to be, who takes acting lessons, voice lessons. When she performs The Garden, which is about this gay man's journey, she does it in drag. She went to the best gender transformation artist in Vancouver and had her beard thickened and put her hair back and bandaged her breast. And she still performs it that way in extremely convincing male drag. She's recently asked me to write a piece about the performer relationship and consent. And this is what I have been working on for the last few months, and it's nearly finished. I'm writing my own text, as I sometimes do. But she's contributed so much to the writing of this text that I've credited her as one of the authors of the lyrics, as it were. It's what Hildegard Westerkamp did when she wrote Klavierklang for her as well. Rachel is credited as one of the text writers. So that's the most recent close relationship. But choreographers, Marie-Josée Chartier, James Kudelka in particular, my association with Early Music Vancouver when I was programming their new music for old instruments, Alexander Weiman, Reggie Mobley, the countertenor, my collaborations with the Victoria Symphony, the Vancouver Symphony. These things have been invaluable in shaping me. And of course, Anthony DeMar, the pianist, Ryan Scott in Toronto, who supported and produced my last opera, which was written with text by Adam Agoyan, another one of my major collaborators. We've written 2 operas together, and I've used his text in a piece for soprano and orchestra, and then later another orchestral piece. I grow tremendously from working with artists, not only in music, but also in different art forms.
This is it, The Garden, a club for men. I've heard so much about it. I've been excited all day. All through the meetings, all through the dullness, all through the greetings and motions and voting. It felt like forever. They asked my opinion. I told them, whatever. In my head, the motions. No one had a notion where I would be soon. I've been hard since now. I'm here. I'm standing on the threshold at last. And I stop, cold. 'Cause suddenly, I think of my old Nana. My grandma and me, a kid on her knee. In the garden. sit in her arbor. She'd hold me and sing. Learn from me. When you are young, you see with your eyes, but to see with your heart makes you wise. No, Nonna, I'd laugh and say, you're wrong, it's not love, but justice that's blind. E justitia. She'd sigh, you'll learn it in time. Love is blind. L'amore è cieco, è cieco. Not now, Nonna. I'm not looking for love or someone to believe in. Just some fun. Just for now. Just for here. Up the stairs. 1, 2, 3. I walk through the door to the garden. Inside? Oh my. No place to hide. I wouldn't even try. So many guys. Every size, every race, every age. Talking, boozing, laughing, cruising. There's a hot guy by the door. So many memories. Do I know him? 2, 3, 4. We met in high school. He was a dream. First guy I went out with. Catcher for the baseball team. Boys like to kiss boys. Girls like to kiss girls. Whoa, some call kissing politics. I like kissing just for kicks. We'd drive for hours in Daddy's Cadillac till we found a hidden spot and jumped into the back. Whoa, boys like to kiss boys, girls like to kiss girls. Whoa, some call kissing politics. I like kissing just for kicks.
Can you talk to me a bit more about what goes into a collaborative and respectful and fruitful experience of working with composer and artist, composer and ensemble?
If there is mutual respect and trust, it is so easy. And I'm sure you know this as a conductor. If the orchestra trusts you, then the collaboration is magical. The telepathy that you experience with a very good conductor or a very good interpreter, this is clear in performance. And it is, in a sense, contagious with the audience. And you can hear it. You can hear when an audience is really listening, and those magical moments where the audience is silent. There's a kind of collective consciousness. You even sense that the audience has stopped breathing. Also, as an audience member, that you're in a very good performance. And if that happens more than once, you're in an extraordinary performance. So I think these things are all related. In terms of collaboration, sometimes you don't need to speak very much. Sometimes only a few sentences are enough to let you understand One of the best collaborations I ever had was with James Kudelka and a piece that we wrote together for the San Francisco Ballet, where he wasn't particularly happy with the ending that I had written. And he said, what I want is to hear all of the will, but none of the ability. And for me, I knew exactly what to do. And I know that might sound cryptic, but sometimes cryptic statements like that can open the doors to your imagination and make the connection. And I did, in fact, give him exactly what he needed to do the dance that he wanted, which was the pas de deux between an extremely good dancer, a female dancer, and her male partner, who, in a sense, portrays the end of dance, the end of ballet as an art form, where she is eventually subsumed into the dance. With Rachel, I listen to what she has to say and I take notes. And she's not only a great musician, but is one of the most politically astute and sensitive human beings I've ever met. She's the only person who, in the year of Truth and Reconciliation, did all the steps of visiting the places of her Canadian ancestors, both her Japanese and Danish ancestors, acknowledging the sort of road of settlement, historical settlement. An amazing human being in these ways. So I'll ask a few questions and I just listen and I take notes. And I give her the music as I'm writing it, also the text with the music as I am writing it. Just Monday, we went through everything. I told her all of the places that I was uncomfortable with in the text, and we worked on it together to more clearly articulate the artistic and the political ideals that she has in this piece. It takes a tremendous amount of creativity on the part of the performer to think, okay, I want a piece of music about this. Who am I going to ask? And then trust that they will be able to do it. And again, perhaps open unexpected artistic doors that one goes through. I wrote a transcription for her of the Liebestod from Tristan und Isolde. I never expected to use Wagner as a source material for my music in my life. And you asked at the beginning of this, what kind of composer am I? What is my music like? Yes, I write music about sound and and properties of the instruments themselves, but I also, particularly in writing for the piano, write music about music, where I take someone else's source material, whether or not it is Bach or Mozart, William Byrd, others, and transform it either with musical graffiti all over it or distilling it, as I did in the case of this transcription of the last scene of Tristan und Isolde. These are leaps that I made in part because of the influence of others and in part because I love the classical repertoire so much. My dear friend Jocelyn Morlock suffered tremendously about the idea of the relevance of writing music for Western instruments and the conflict, the guilt that she felt about her life as a settler. She even wrote a piece about it, a kind of what Germans would call a Hörspiel, a kind of radio piece that was commissioned by Sean Bickerton in the, maybe you know it, she commissioned a number of pieces. I consider hers and the one by Juliet Palmer to be the best of those six. It was curated by Dylan Robinson. Jocelyn suffered so much thinking about where does Western music belong in Canada? And I said to her, I've never felt any of those conflicts, ever. I feel extremely at home in classical music. I was a little boy who loved Bach and Beethoven. I loved to practice and just grew, and I learned German. I feel completely at home in Western music and that tradition, and the extension of that tradition in the American experimental tradition. These things are home to me. I don't feel these conflicts at all, which I know a lot of my colleagues, in addition to Jocelyn, really ponder about.
Can you tell me a bit more about your identity as a queer composer that kind of underlies a number of your works that have been more specifically about the queer experience and queer identity, but also, of course, that's part of who you are and very open about that. And can you tell me about your experience as a queer composer and your journey within the classical music realm, and perhaps speak to maybe other younger composers that are maybe struggling with their identity, whatever that might be?
I've had obstacles in my career rather than my artistic life because of my sexuality on many occasions, sometimes very overt, sometimes microaggressions. These things have changed largely for the better, but I live in a liberal city. My life might be very different if I were living in Saskatoon, for example, where gender politics and schools at the moment is an extremely hot issue, and where the premier himself has taken it upon himself to block progressive legislation so that kids can express themselves freely at school. We must never take human rights for granted. And we've seen so many examples where human rights can be taken away much more quickly than they are won. And we must always be observing and vigilant about these things. For a young queer composer, I'm sorry to say, it really depends on your family, your friends, the people who surround you. My father was enormously accepting of me as a gay man. My mother was not. My younger brother is not. You can't choose your biological family that way. You can't often choose the community that you grow up in, but you can choose to go through life bravely and truthfully and take the consequences of those choices, which ultimately I think lead to happiness and certainly lead to a kind of artistic happiness, because what is art other than an expression of the truth? And we feel this truth or authenticity in work. We know it as composers as we are writing. If a section of the piece doesn't feel quite right, how is it that we know that it's not right? The music tells us that we have not done something truthful in a way. And through revision, through listening more deeply, we can come to what the music wants to do. It sounds romantic, but there is a kind of submission to the music, which I'm sure is why people speak of muses. And certainly muses, we were talking about performers, they can take the form of a real live human being, but they can also take the form of a kind of luck, because I think musical success is often a combination of time and perseverance and luck. Talent really helps, but those three elements take us through. So I would advise young queer people to be themselves. I remember my medical doctor, though, when I was considering coming out to my parents, told me to wait until I was economically independent of them. You don't make those sorts of decisions without thinking. And I do know people in my personal life who were kicked out of the house by their parents in their teens. One of them actually was on the Olympic diving team for Canada. He was 15 and was kicked out by his mother, and eventually went back to diving and won a silver medal at the Gay Olympics in Sydney. Wanted to go back to his childhood passion 15 years later.
Do you see your music and your creative output as a way to advocate for queer composers, or in a subtle way or sometimes less subtle way? Is that a conscious choice?
I do have pieces that specifically address gay issues. The first opera that I wrote with Adam Cohen, the core of it is a gay love triangle set against the background of African politics, and it's bumping against Canadian values. And certainly I've written cabaret songs that address this in a humorous way. I wrote a piece called The Pronoun Symphony, where I took the Surprise Symphony of Franz Joseph Haydn and rewrote it with words about pronoun choices, which at the time was extremely controversial. And now I think it's just controversial. But yes, I wrote a piece called The Pronoun Symphony, which has had actually a lot of performances, including I was asked to make a version of it for symphony orchestra. I did a version for voice and strings that was performed by the Vancouver Symphony. It's Tea Kasahara who performed it beautifully, convincingly, and from memory. That was in the midst of the pandemic, so the performance was only recorded. It wasn't performed to a live audience, but in its version for piano, it's been done in cabarets in the United States and in Canada and in Scandinavia, strangely enough.
What do you hope people take away from their experience of your music, whether it's listening to one of the many recordings that's been put out there or in a live performance?
That's a very difficult question because music creates imprecise emotions and reactions, sometimes with very precise means. So I write something and have no control over how that is perceived or what emotional effect or impact that may have on someone. I have written pieces that have brought people to tears in a good way. I have written pieces that have really irritated people. I have no control over these things. The only thing I can really do is be true to myself as an artist and hope that the music somehow speaks to the people who are listening.
What's next for you creatively?
Once I've finished this piece for Rachel, I'm going to be writing a piece for voice, alto flute and guitar. Takeshi McGregor, the flute player, and Adrian Verdejo are wonderful proponents of my music, as is the singer Kathy Lewis, whom I've known since I was a teenager studying with Murray at Askin. She was studying with his wife, Frances James, who was one of Canada's great singers. So it will be a trio with the poetry of Barbara Black, who is a poet who works in Victoria. We have not figured out the text yet. I'll be going to Victoria soon, and she's going to write lyrics specifically for this piece, and it will become part of a recording which will be released on Redshift, I hope. It depends on when I finish the piece, actually, which will be of my music for flute, voice, and guitar, because I have a piece for flute and soprano, which I wrote for Murray at Askin's 90th birthday concert. I have pieces for voice and guitar. I've got pieces for flute and guitar, and this will bring the three of them together and I think make a very nice album. So I was very touched when Mark McGregor and Adrian came to me suggesting this.
Rodney Sharman, thank you so much for coming on Musing and sharing so generously of your work and life experience. It's been such a pleasure.
A pleasure speaking with you, Janna, and nice to see you again.
This has been Musing on CJSW 90.9 FM in Calgary. I'm your host, Janna Sailor. Thanks for tuning in. As we close today's episode of Musing, we acknowledge and honor the Indigenous peoples of these lands as the original music makers, storytellers, creators, and caretakers of artistic and cultural knowledge across what is now known as Canada. We recognize that music, ceremony, and song have existed here since time immemorial, and we are grateful for the opportunity to listen, learn, and share space through artistic practice. Musing is a production of the Canadian Music Centre Prairie Region. Until next time, thanks for listening and for supporting Canadian artists in your community.